me, the word is my weapon. It's a peaceful weapon. I'm a peaceful warrior. And I'm so glad to be able to convene this 5-day gathering. Today's guest is Nina Simons, who is the founder and Chief Relationship Officer at Bioneers. And we'll be posting some links and information about Bioneers in the chat. If you're not familiar with Bioneers, you should be. Nina also founded and leads the Everywoman's Leadership Program at Bioneers. And she publishes a new Leading from the Feminine newsletter that I recommend to you. And again, we'll be posting the links with her co-author, Anneke Campbell. Nina co-edited Moonrise, The Power of Women Leading from the Heart, a few years ago. And then more recently, she wrote Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, A Woman Listens for Leadership, which she published with Greenfire Press, and which is now in a second edition with wonderful discussion guides and practices added. So it's both theory and practice. It's kind of a workbook on what Nina calls full spectrum leadership. And so we'll be digging into Nina does a lot, and we'll be trying to cover as much as we can in our time today. And we'll welcome your questions. So Nina, do you want to come on camera? There she is. Okay. And
hey, Jennifer.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
So I wonder if perhaps as an antidote to thinking about nuclear war, which is where Jim does immediately, you could maybe just take us into an introduction to sacred activism to start off, and what that means to you and how you practice it.
Sure. Such a good question. Well, I think in order to get there, I need to mention that when I first became aware of how gender was affecting my life, I realized it through a multidimensional lens. So I saw not only how I had all kinds of self-limiting beliefs, but also how I saw the world as being imbalanced in terms of the yin and the yang, or the masculine and the feminine. And I saw that through all our institutions, through our ways of thinking, through our analyses, in so many ways. And so as I became interested, well, when I first began working with Bioneers, I didn't think of myself as an activist, because the only people I thought of as activists were those who demonstrated and got arrested, and that was not my way of making change in the world. But as I grew myself into who I felt my soul wanted me to be, I began to realize that there are as many forms of activism as we are humans on the planet, and that activism takes so many shapes, and only each of us can find our own pathway to how we want to affect change in the world. And then I was lucky enough very early on to have exposure to a sacred school. And it really introduced me to all kinds of methodologies and ways of turning inward and ways of perceiving myself, and meditation and qigong and tai chi and all those things. And what I realized somewhere along the way was that sacred activism to me means serving what we most deeply love and wish to protect or defend. And it's kind of that simple. But when you add together, the sacred and activism have been falsely segregated in our culture and, set completely apart, when in fact, what I find is that for me, what I most deeply want to serve is the reemergent feminine in the world and in us all. And really the most sacred and divine form of that I know is this planet that we get to live on, Mother Life, Mother Earth. And so when I combine my sense of the sacred with my sense of what I want to defend and protect, it sort of gives a whole different power boost to what I care about doing. And I think in this time, we all need all the regenerative practices we can get. And to some extent, Jennifer, also, it's about connecting our inner work with our outer work. Because as I started to say, the imbalance of the yin and yang in our culture means that we have tended to devalue the personal, the inner, the emotional, and the embodied, and the spiritual, even, to the detriment of our wholeness. And so, sacred activism to me is a way of combining, yeah, we've got to care for ourselves as we're caring for the world and caring for making change in the world. So, that was kind of a long answer, but since you asked,
Beautiful. And I see it's resonating with people in the chat also.
oh,
So,
good.
yeah, the devaluing of the body and the emotions, I think that's been a theme that you've been working with for quite some time.
Mhm.
I know you've been working with it and on it in different ways. And, one way I think in this context, it might be interesting to hear about how you have made the public space of the Bioneers a more welcoming place for
Huh.
emotions. Body. Because in
Oh,
classrooms and public spaces, it's
yeah.
not easy to do. So you are a role model for me there, and I'd love you to share
Oh,
that.
gosh. Well, thank you for that. What a wonderful question. It's been a long-term project, I have to say, since I've been at Bioneers for more than 35 years, which I never would have imagined in my youth. But here we are. And what I found is that, my background was in theater and the arts, but particularly theater. And I loved theater because I knew that the live experience of witnessing someone else's transformation had the capacity to transform the participants, the observers. And so when I came to Bioneers, it was with that sensibility. And Kenny and I, when we started Bioneers, we had never been to a conference. So we had no idea. I mean, we had no preconceived notions that we had to bat down. We just kind of made it up from scratch. And what that meant was that we created a feeling of a ceremonial space. And we did that partly by decorating the stage with beautiful artwork and by inviting drummers to drum while people are coming in, and by interspersing the talks with performances. And in recent years, we've been able to add all kinds of interactive sessions, which you've led, Jennifer. And we also have grief rituals at Bioneers. And it's a very unusual space in that it's so multicultural and so multi-generational all at once. It's sort of multi-everything. It's the most pluralistic space I've ever been at in a conference. And it winds up feeling sort of more like a festival than a conference. I don't know. It's a convening. We've never found quite the right word for it, but it is amazing. And it's very uplifting and very profound. And we really invite people to show up with their whole selves and not just to experience it in their minds. Um, and I think, it seems to be working because here we are 35 years later. Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I have been to many conferences, and there's nothing
yeah.
like the Pioneers. And I think it's sort of the antithesis of, let's say, a cop XYZ, conference where it's all so
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
and the bodies are, just an afterthought in the room.
yeah,
And I think that is a masculine feminine model issue, And so
yeah,
showing up with your whole self is showing up with your both sides of your brain and your your body, your mind, spirit, heart. And that's what's so beautifully invited at the Bioneers.
Yeah, the other thing that I would mention is that Bioneers has always been a revolution from the heart of nature. It's always been about nature-based solutions, and it has a huge indigeneity component and program at its center. And as a result, we are all influenced, I think, I hope, by the way that many or most indigenous peoples still hold nature as sacred, and that's a whole different paradigm than we're accustomed to in the Western world.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I think you have been a real trailblazer in showing how to build alliances that are truly reciprocal and fair and honest and open. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of that work and the blessings and
Oof.
rewards?
Sure. Well, it's one of the things I'm most proud of myself for, honestly, in this lifetime, is that sometime, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, it must have been longer than that, must have been 20 years ago, I realized that I really had to turn into educating myself about what it meant to walk in the world in a culture of white supremacy, and what it meant to become a good ally. Um, and I went to a lot of trainings, and I also convened circles of women who were very intentionally as diverse as we could get them, um, always with over 30% women of color, and later with over 50% women of color. And Van Jones actually said my favorite quote about turning toward racial justice work. He said, "It's kind of like walking through a room full of rakes, garden rakes. You can't walk through the room without stepping on a rake, and when you step on a rake, it's going to hit you in the head." And it's true. So it's not without its bumps and bruises, and I've had some pretty painful ones, and I'm even in one right now. So the learning goes on and on and on. But but also I'm so fulfilled by the friendships and the relationships that I have, and by how it's deepened my understanding of other people's worlds, and my capacity to really show up in a true partnership. And as you said, with reciprocity. So, I mean, there are huge, huge benefits. And, the garden rake thing, I mean, I see it as, I don't think anything really great happens without a few bumps and bruises. And I think we would all do well to realize that we're just not as fragile as we think. And so for me, that's been a great challenge and joy in my world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Bioneers over the last 35 years has been through this intense period of cancel culture.
Right.
And this and which it's kind of paradoxical that we have cancel culture, which is very aggressive, at the same time as a sense of fragility and risk averseness, and pulling back.
Yes.
Navigating those waters with a big conference that really aims to dig into the most important issues of our time is, very difficult. And props to you and Kenny for, just going back to it over and over again, because it's not
Mm.
easy. So in the book, Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, one of my favorite chapters is the one where or there were one or two where you really unpack how you do it. You really show us how do you recover from a harm. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, some of what I've learned is how to inoculate, how to prepare yourself when in a mixed race setting, um, to recognize that uh, there are likely to be bumps and bruises, that we do occupy such different realities because of not only the race-based structure of our society, but the class structure, you know, all of the biases that we have in our society that tend to lift some up and put others down. And so, you know, in groups, we would often suggest that we make an agreement that if one of those moments happens, that everyone has full permission to say oops or ouch. And I learned rather early on that my body often tells me before my mind does. So I notice I get this little clench in my stomach when somebody has said something and I can feel, because I'm a tremendous empath, and I can feel that it's hurt somebody in the room, you know, and that little clench tells me, oh, we need to stop and check in, um, and see if we can unpack what just happened. So that's one thing. But the other big thing for me has been a deep learning that the quality and flexibility and tenure of our relationships is always a function of rupture and repair. Um, that, you know, for everyone listening, I mean, if you think about your families and you think about your friends, like almost everyone you've probably had some kind of rupture with at some point, right? And the whole key to really navigating good, strong, lasting, flexible relationships is how you repair and so one of the agreements that I find really important when entering into deep relational waters with another person is to agree that if a rupture happens between us, we'll both turn back toward each other. And, you know, the tendency in our culture is to shrink and hide and mask and turn away because many of us, conflict averse. And Malidoma Somé said, conflict is relationships' way of inviting you to go deeper. And so, you know, those are some of the things that come to mind immediately. Yeah. And it
Yeah,
doesn't always work, by the way. I can't say that this is like a tried and true prescription, but it's helpful. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think we at every in every sector and at every age group, we
Mm.
need this kind of information. Maybe we call it a training, I don't know, but we just don't really have the tools. Like we're not
Right.
being given the tools. And
Yeah.
because I'm in the education sector, I feel like education is a place that maybe those tools could be widely dispersed. And so
Ah.
I'm so happy that Bioneers has started up Bioneers Learning to keep Bioneers spirit going all year long,
Mm,
And I think what it's so powerful to see this kind of work modeled. Like it's one thing to
mm,
hear you talk about it, but
right.
then another thing to actually witness what happens when you start off a group experience with these kinds of agreements and
Yeah.
you talk openly about not backing away, leaning
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
conflict. And I agree that we're in a very conflict averse moment, and for good reason, because it's dangerous out there,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in terms of what you're saying about education, Jennifer, I just want to say, you know, I am so chagrined at the level of education that many people in this country have received over the last few decades because, you know, there is so little education around emotion, around relationship, around discernment, around critical thinking. I mean, I really believe we would not be where we are today if our education system integrated those things in a much more prioritized way. So, yeah, thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday here as well, that education is a place in need of transformation to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
But then
it
everything
may,
is in need of transformation right now.
yes. And,
Yes.
I think a lot of your thinking has to do with systems change and
Hmm.
big structural kind of consciousness changing. And sometimes I find it's very hard to do that from within existing structures.
Yeah.
Like for me to try to transform my institution and be a little revolutionary cell, it's very hard, So, but
Mm,
if we can find each other outside of those massive structures as we are here and
yeah.
as we do at the Bioneers, I think we can create some kind of underground ripple of
Yeah.
revolution. And yeah, you think so too?
Oh, totally. Totally. In fact, it's one of the things that gives me most hope has been witnessing the slow and steady, not slow actually, pretty fast and steady growth of civil society, largely under the radar. But, I think it's part of the principle of women's leadership for me and not just women. It's the principle of the new form of leadership we're all co-birthing that we have to do things together. The solitary hero is a thing of the past. It ain't working. And we need each other. And so the more we can gather in community and really work on things together is where our power lies. Yeah,
There's that Thich Nhat Hanh saying about the next Buddha will be a Sangha,
that's right.
right? Yeah.
Yes, I love
So
that.
we need to form our own circles of change and do it locally and globally and on the
Yeah,
internet, everywhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just read a beautiful quote by Fritjof Capra, who is the Austrian physicist and early systems thinker and very brilliant. And he wrote, I just picked this up yesterday, in the end, the aggressors always destroy themselves, making way for others who know how to cooperate and get along. Life's much less a competitive struggle for survival than a triumph of cooperation and creativity. It's
Yes.
reassuring, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, yesterday we were talking with a positive psychologist, so we were talking about more personal
Uh-huh.
issues. And there's that sense of shame and guilt that human beings bear, those of us who are aware of the
Yes.
damage that humans are doing. And I think it's really important to recognize that we are part of the earth. We are the earth.
Yeah.
You know, the earth tends towards life and growth and
Yeah.
health and vitality. And the more we
Yeah.
can turn to be in alignment with what the earth wants,
Yeah.
the more we'll all flourish.
Yeah.
So, but there are powerful headwinds at the
Yep.
moment, especially.
Yep.
So, what are some practices that you'd recommend for turning towards life in that way and being in alignment with Earth?
Oh, well, oh, that's a lovely question. Wow. Well, I'm finding meditating very helpful these days, I gotta say. Um, and just letting my thoughts drift by like clouds so that I get a sense of the piece of me when my mind isn't chattering. Um, and I'm lucky enough to live at the edge of a national forest. So, so I walk my beautiful dog in the woods twice a day. And when I do, and you can do this in a park, you can do this anywhere. When I do, I pour love through the soles of my feet into the earth.
Mm.
And I send her messages that I'm grateful and asking her forgiveness. Um, and one of the things that I love is, I have an altar around a tree near my home. And there was a time when our home was actually threatened by a wildfire, and it was not very far away. And because of where we live, that's a real threat. And I asked a friend who had done a lot of work with Peruvian teachers who I knew had protected her own home from a wildfire in California. I asked her counsel and I said, "Is there anything you can teach me or tell me?" And she said, "Yeah, make an altar, choose the tree that's right, make an altar around your tree and decorate it with flowers at its base. And you can use shells or stones, you know, decorate it any way you want. And then periodically go to it with water and sometimes with wine, and
Mm.
feed it around its base. And, you know, hold your hands to it and send prayers through the tree. And you're sending prayers through her roots down into the earth and through her branches up to the sky people and to the nearby mountain. And, you know, again, those prayers are basically sending love and gratitude and asking forgiveness and then asking protection. And I love that ritual.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what I find so remarkable about you, and it's true of all the world rights that I invited this week, is that you have a sense of the sacred that you're willing to share, and yet you're also so solidly planted in the world and just sort of ordinary reality and
Mm.
scheduling and things like you're not off in a monastery or a hermit's hut somewhere, very much in the world, and yet you're able to balance these two
Mm.
um, sort of modes of being. And I think maybe this is something we all need to work on, you know? Yeah.
Well, I haven't really worked on it, honestly. I think I've been called towards it. And and the
Mhm.
sacred is calling me more and more as I get older, you know, and I still feel like a total neophyte. Um, and I'm perhaps unusual in that I choose to have a lot of eclectic teachers from a lot of different disciplines, you know, rather than just one. But I love to weave them and choose and find counsel where I find it.
Mhm.
And it feels like part of my assignment to share what I learn.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that is part of our time also, is the weaving together of cultures. And
Mm.
again, sort of in the along with cancel culture, there's been a lot of sensitivity around cultural appropriation
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
worry about that. And my feeling, as I've sort of explored different modalities myself, is that these are all human paths.
Yeah.
And if we go back far enough in human lineage, we connect, we all connect, and there's so many similarities. And
Yeah.
so, in times that are as challenging as now, why
Yeah.
wouldn't we try to reach towards all the wisdom out there in the world? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know, our indigeneity program is called that because we're all indigenous to Mother Earth. And if we go back far enough, we had ancestors who knew how to live right on this planet, you know. And so it's a path that for me, you know, feels hopeful and beckoning and um, just being respectful learners, you know. It certainly feels like a time for that. And also, I mean, the more I work, you know, I just finished an online course in sacred activism and with a beautiful circle of people. And everyone was challenged with a work-life balance.
Mhm.
Everyone was challenged with making enough time for self-care and spirit work and inner work. And I think, you know, we're all, many of us anyway, products of this culture that, you know, is all about hyper productivity. And again, that's the masculine feminine imbalance, right? If we're, you know, if our body calls us to rest, we need to rest. And the truth is, that's when some of our greatest creativity and inspiration can come through, is when we're in receptive mode. And how do we make time and space for ourselves to do that in a culture that's saying go, 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 do, do, do? So I'm grappling with that big time myself.
Yeah. And that's also a function of our smartphone era
Yeah.
where we're never off, we're never, and kids don't even know how to be bored. Like being bored is
Oh,
actually a blessing sometimes, because it opens the door to daydreams, and
yeah.
daydream can have so much meaning and
Hmm.
power. Yeah, I was a daydreamy kind of kid, and I'm only realizing belatedly how important that was.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So maybe just one last question, then we'll bring Jim back in. I know he's got his own questions. Um, I was thinking about how at one and the same time we're asked to be both birth doulas for the new world and
Uh,
hospice workers for the old world, right? And Bioneers is right at that juncture. So how are you doing that? How are you balancing those two roles, and how can we all help?
I once did an exercise at a retreat that came from Meg Wheatley, and it was quite a beautiful one because the facilitators laid out one piece of rope that was an arc going down, and then another piece of rope that was described the arc coming up, which was meant to describe the fall of one civilization and the birth of the other.
Mm,
And we were then instructed to find where on that matrix we each belonged, because I think people are called to very different places in that process. Um, and I am definitely lean toward the birth side. I feel as though, life's fertility is part of what I seek to support and protect and serve. Um, and I have a very strong call toward healing. And this is a very difficult time to be living through. I mean, everyone I know, myself included, is feeling kind of like we're on a roller coaster, that there is such deep grief at the suffering that's going on, at the incredible violence and the cruelty and the decimation of the planet. Um, and, in terms of climate change, this election could not have gone worse. Um, but there is still room for surprise turnarounds, which I'm kind of banking on myself. And and also, as you were alluding to earlier, Jennifer, I believe in the power of the people, and I do believe that we are mobilizing in ways, some underground and some more visible, that ultimately um, will have our say. And and I don't know, I can't predict how it's going to happen, but I do believe in the nobility of the human spirit, and that if we can engage with each other in truly compassionate and deep listening ways, we can reach across our differences. I mean, I think part of what has to really transform in our culture is we need to become a culture that values difference instead of being frightened by it, right? That recognizes that diversity is nature's failsafe against extinction, and that therefore it behooves us to become really great white allies and to learn from everyone what we don't know. Because, I learned early on, I remember sitting in a mixed circle and talking about how I grew up in a home where there was no anger expressed. And so I didn't know how to express anger. And I just felt it as this undercurrent all the time, which was awful. And so I'm really kind of a baby at learning how to express healthy anger. And this Black woman raised her hand and said, "Well, that's not true in my culture." And I was like, "Oh, great. I can learn from you. Fabulous." Not that it's her responsibility to teach me, but it gave me a big clue about, aha, so I think valuing our differences and um, and bringing ourselves, what we haven't really talked about is how, I mean, I believe what we need to do is heal our relations within ourselves, with each other, and with Mother Earth. And within ourselves is the first priority in a sense, because we have so much self-judgment and self-limiting beliefs. And that stuff isn't serving us, And part of what happened for me, yes, ancestral healing is so key. And, part of what happened for me was just realizing that if I was really committed to becoming who I believed my soul brought me here to be, I needed to tame those voices and I needed to strengthen my own self awareness and self assurance and self confidence, not without, not without discernment, but that keeping myself small was not going to serve anybody. And and so for me, that's a really essential part of the sacred activism work is to deal with our own stuff and connect. I think part of what's beginning to happen for me is finding ways to connect with my ancestors because I believe they have a lot to support me with. And they've
Mm.
lived through probably worse than this, if you can imagine that. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I agree. I think
yeah.
that's something that seems to be a bit of a trend now, this turning towards ancestral
Yeah.
healing and
Yeah.
the power of ancestors learning from their experience, contacting them
Mm.
directly if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and of course, importantly, becoming good ancestors ourselves and
Yeah.
being more aware of ourselves as the ancestors of the future.
Yeah.
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 What kind,
Truly.
what being intentional about what kind of future we want to leave, what kind of
Mm.
legacy. I
Yeah.
just had my first granddaughter just join my
Oh,
family. She's now 3, and so that gives personal just
yeah.
there's this little person who will probably see the turn of the 22nd century,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
it really makes concrete that responsibility that we all have
Yeah.
towards. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
even for those of us who are childless by choice, I find I have many goddaughters and many, many people who, and the truth be told, I mean, mm, it's such a blessing to live in this extraordinary place and to love her and to learn to be better stewards, partners in her evolution. And she's the best teacher that we could possibly turn to,
The little
you
one.
know.